Hey folks, welcome back. So, what if I told you that the way you think about your process of healing and the process of trauma resolution totally determines the kind of experience you're going to have and the outcome you're going to have ultimately? In this video, I want to discuss some of the common misconceptions that people have around trauma healing and how it goes down versus how people expect it to go down. I also want to discuss a very important distinction in terms of understanding what this process actually is when it comes to healing. So if that interests you, please join me. Okay, so before we go ahead and get into the kind of core idea in this video, I want to just set up a little bit of context with you guys first here. So as a coach and a hypnotherapist and someone who works with people, supporting them around using psychedelics for their healing and for the resolution of their issues in their life, I find myself often having to help people kind of reframe and clarify their understanding of what trauma healing looks like. It's really, really common for me to bump into a lot of misconceptions that people have around what trauma healing is and how it goes down that ends up often making it slower, harder, scarier, more stressful than it needs to be. And a lot of times these misconceptions really can kind of skew and distort where a person tends to go, in this process of healing. So instead of discovering and exploring and learning together and getting a feel for it organically, I find a lot of times when people come to this work with a set of kind of expectations and projections and assumptions, that can really create this loaded plate of priming that I then have to kind of help the person undo in order to have the space and the room to properly heal. And, when I unpack this further with people, a lot of times this really boils down to a misaligned set of expectations, like I said, and assumptions, like I said, but really beliefs. It really boils down to, I believe trauma healing looks like this or needs to feel like this or has to happen this particular way. And so people are looking for a certain kind of experience in themselves to know that they're healing. And while they're looking at that, they're often totally missing out on the transmission of what it is I'm trying to show them or help them experience, or, quite honestly, what their own nervous system is already giving them and demonstrating to them as the process of healing already happening. So in this video, I want to kind of clarify a distinction that I think really starts to make this make more sense in terms of what trauma healing actually looks like and feels like, and what the kind of skill or process that we're actually engaged in is when we're doing this kind of deep healing work with ourselves. So let's go ahead and get into it. And we'll start here with a key concept from a trauma healing course that I took that I want to share with you. And it's just a linguistic reframe here. It's a linguistic distinction, but there's a lot behind it. So let's talk about it. Okay, so the distinction I want to share here with you is the idea of learning to unfold yourself, unfold your nervous system, unfurl, expand, open up yourself versus forcing yourself to heal or fixing yourself. Okay, so this is a really big difference. So what we see a lot in terms of how people come to trauma healing in terms of preconceptions is that this is something you have to do to yourself. Often that's going to be stressful and scary and overwhelming. This is kind of the set of assumptions again. Often that it's going to involve being really triggered and really overwhelmed. It's going to involve reprocessing a lot of difficult memories or difficult emotions. And it's going to really hinge on your ability to force yourself to go to a place you don't want to go in your own nervous system and really push yourself to stimulate this intense, painful healing experience that ultimately becomes a net positive, but in the short term is really uncomfortable and painful and overwhelming. And I think there's a bunch of reasons why this preconception is there, right? And there are different flavors of this. You see people who expect that trauma healing always looks like tremoring out energy and shaking. There are people out there who expect that it always looks like, going to the darkest, most painful place in your psyche. There are people who expect that this looks like being totally triggered and overwhelmed and dealing with like being massively, massively dysregulated. And part of the reason that these assumptions are there is, I think, just kind of this implicit fear that we have about being overwhelmed or triggered, and that this is probably tied into the avoidance of our pattern of not processing the trauma, and we're not knowing how, or not knowing what that is, or the imprints we have of, fear of emotion and fear of overwhelming experiences in general, especially when we've been through a traumatic past. I think another piece of this also comes from, some of the pieces that we've been exposed to of trauma therapy that have surfaced on the internet. So you may be familiar with like Peter Levine and the polar bear video, where the polar bear shakes out and is kind of running while it's kind of, healing from being tranquilized. You may think of like PSIP and Saj Razvi and his work, where he's really advocates going into the most painful place in your nervous system and kind of staying there and not using whatever kind of distraction or coping mechanism you normally use, but instead feeling it. And there are a lot of different schools of thought, right? There's TRE, there's trauma release exercises where they tremor out trauma. So there's stuff out there that looks like this, and clearly there are modalities out there that kind of operate this way, right? But there's more to the picture and more to the story. And unless you're kind of training in helping people to process trauma, or deeply studying this and, doing courses and learning from different points of view, you may not have the complete picture. You just get these kind of like superficial kind of impressions and hits that this is what trauma therapy looks like. Now, in a recent trauma therapy course that I took, one of the teachers made this distinction where she's saying, think of it as we are helping the person unfold their nervous system. We are there to help them facilitate and like a flower opening, an expansion, an unfolding, an undoing, if you will. And the kind of the core presupposition here is that there is perhaps a desire by the nervous system to want to unfold itself, right? And that's perhaps a more natural state of being, or more close to, what is healthy or normal or optimal for us, right? So if that's the mindset, then this is, again, a very different point of view from I need to fix myself because I'm broken and I have to force a fix upon myself, or I need to force myself to process these things that are overwhelming and painful and too much, right? The process of unfolding as a metaphor and as a reframe is a completely different thing, where it's about patient, present, attuned, working something through, following something, working with exactly where something's at, not rushing it, and kind of being more encouraging, safe, and supportive rather than forceful and domineering. And that's really this reframe that I want to talk about in more depth here. But just think about that for a moment. Get the flavor there. Unfolding yourself versus fixing yourself. Unfolding yourself versus forcing yourself to heal. Unfolding yourself versus changing something in yourself without full, clear internal agreement. Do you get the difference there? Do you get the difference in flavor? It is a world of difference, in my opinion, in terms of mindset. And so I want to kind of explain a little bit more about why this is, I think, the more correct way to understand it and the more useful way to understand it. So if we assume that the nervous system is capable of unfolding itself, and again, this is a bit of metaphorical language here. This is not necessarily literal, because you're not literally folded, and well, maybe your proteins are folded and maybe the ridges in your brain are folded, but you know what I mean. The nervous system itself is not technically folded in on itself. This is a metaphoric language for the kind of experience, the kind of emotional mindset, somatic kind of experience we have when we are kind of carrying a trauma pattern in our nervous system, right? We tend to close up and withdraw and shrink and contract and remove ourselves and try to self-protect and tighten and kind of bolster and buckle down and these kinds of things, right? So the metaphor is the inverse of that: expansion, undoing, unfolding, releasing, moving through, allowing, coaxing, inviting, right? That's kind of kind of the mindset here. So I want you to think about this. If this is true, that the nervous system knows how to unfold itself at some level, and perhaps even wants to, and that this is perhaps natural or normal or correct for us to be in an open, expanded, unfolded state of being, so to speak, what's needed for that to happen first, for that process of unfolding, like a flower unfolding, right, is a certain amount of safety, right? We need to feel signals that it's safe around us enough to go through that process of unfolding, much in the same way that, of course, a flower needs a certain amount of sunlight and, warmth in the air and, enough water, et cetera, to begin to unfold itself on the plant that it is a part of, right? Same idea here. There are certain preconditions we need met. And in this case, it is the precondition of safety signals coming to us that help us give us this impression that, okay, this is an environment and a moment where I can feasibly unfold myself and undo this pattern of contraction that I've kind of acquired, right? Now, in order for those safety signals to be there, I want you to think about this with me. If I'm telling myself that I need to be some other way than how I am, and I need to force myself to experience something really horrific and terrible and overwhelming and frightening, and I need to push myself, and something is not right about me, and I have to, forcibly change something about myself, essentially. Does that message, does that signal feel safe? Is that a safety communication? Does that resonate with, hey, you're going to be safe here? I would say not. Because that message that you need to force yourself to change in order to heal ultimately says, I'm going to work against the tendency of my own nervous system. I'm going to disagree with myself. I'm going to, essentially violate my own internal boundaries and needs in order to get this result. Right? So if I'm doing that, right, that is not a safety signal. That is not a signal that says, hey, it's okay to let go and open up and unfold here. That's a signal that you're not okay. Something is wrong here, and we're going to force you to be some other way, right? That feels deeply unsafe. I don't know about you, but every time I've gotten that kind of signal in the world around me, it tends to make me want to contract more, not open up more, right? So in order to unfold ourselves, we need a safety signal, a bunch of safety signals, quite frankly. And one of those safety signals is that it's okay to be where we're at, and that it is safe to open up, and that we're not going to be met with control, judgment, invalidation. We're not going to have our boundaries or needs violated. We're going to have the room to be where we're at and unfold at the rate and in the way that we need to as part of our organic healing. Right? And so this message and this set of expectations of I need to force myself to change, to heal, to fix myself, I need to force myself to tremor out the trauma. I need to have a big, dramatic, cathartic experience in order for this to be real, really undermines our capacity to actually do the healing work. Right. And I guess the kind of idea I want to leave you with here, and kind of what we'll wrap with here in the video, is just this reframe that I want you to really understand that the path of healing, right, when it comes to emotional, psychological healing, from my point of view and from what I keep seeing and experiencing with people, the path of healing is a path of learning how to unfold yourself and feel comfortable in that open, expanded state, much more than it is a path of forcing yourself to process, to be different, to change, to fix, right? This ties nicely into a very kind of common paradox we see in the personal development world, which is, growth from self-judgment and from shame generally doesn't work. And there's this paradox of accepting yourself as you are, but also growing and changing and leveling up, developing yourself personally, right? And how these two can be very contrasting intentions, right? And the way that you undo that, how you kind of transcend that paradox, is that you grow not from a place of self-judgment and forcing yourself to be better, right, from shame, but you grow and you heal from self-affirmation, from self-alignment, from organic trust and connection, and encouraging yourself to expand, not because your bad, wrong need to be different, but because it's exciting and compelling and curious and interesting and beautiful to evolve and grow and expand your experience as a human being. Totally different mindset, way better results, quite frankly. So the path is unfolding. The path is expansion. It is not force. It is not dominating yourself. It is not breaking the broken parts of yourself or shaming the broken parts of yourself. It is not trying to rigidly control yourself into a healing state. This is where I have some big disagreements and some divergences with what I see in certain parts of the psychedelic therapy world or even the regular therapy world. And I can kind of substantiate where I'm coming from more and more in other videos, but hopefully I've kind of made my point here enough for now. So anyways, let's wrap it there. I don't really need to say much more about it than that. Let me know if you think this is useful. How does this land for you? Do you agree? Does that make sense? Is this confusing? Do you disagree? Leave a comment down below. It would mean a lot to me just to kind of get your thoughts on this. And thank you for watching. As always, I have more content on the way sometime soon. All right. Much love to you guys. Take care.